Matt Damon walks into one of Beverly Hills' most exclusive restaurants, dressed casually in jeans and sneakers, expecting a quiet dinner. Instead, he gets publicly humiliated by an arrogant waiter who treats him like he doesn't belong there, refusing to serve him properly and making snide comments loud enough for other diners to hear. What the waiter doesn't realize is that he just made the biggest mistake of his career. And what Matt Damon does next will leave everyone speechless and teach us all an unforgettable lesson about dignity, respect, and true class. Before we dive into this incredible true story, smash that like button if you believe everyone deserves respect regardless of who they are, and subscribe for more amazing real-life stories. Drop your name and city in the comments so I can give you a special shout-out in our next video. It was a quiet Thursday evening in Beverly Hills, and Matt Damon just wanted to enjoy a peaceful dinner. After wrapping up a long day of meetings and script readings, the Academy Award-winning actor decided to treat himself to a meal at Le Bernardin West, one of Los Angeles' most prestigious restaurants. The establishment was everything you'd expect from a luxury dining venue. Crystal chandeliers worth more than most people's cars, tables draped in pristine white linens, and an atmosphere that screamed wealth and exclusivity. The clientele consisted of business moguls, tech entrepreneurs, and Hollywood elite, all dressed to impress. But Matt Damon, he chose to dress down for the evening. Dark jeans, a simple navy sweater, and comfortable sneakers. No designer labels, no flashy jewelry, nothing that would immediately scream movie star. He just wanted to blend in and enjoy his meal in peace. As he approached the restaurant's imposing glass doors, Matt had no idea that this simple decision to dress casually would lead to one of the most eye-opening experiences of his life. The restaurant's interior was breathtaking. Soft lighting created an intimate atmosphere, while the gentle sounds of classical music mixed with quiet conversations and the clinking of expensive silverware. Every detail was meticulously designed to cater to society's elite. Matt walked up to the hostess station, where a young woman in an elegant black dress was managing reservations. "Good evening," he said politely. "I have a reservation under Damon for 8:30. The hostess quickly located his reservation and smiled warmly. "Yes, Mr. Damon, table for one, right this way, please." As Matt followed the hostess through the dining room, he couldn't help but notice the typical crowd. Men in expensive suits discussing million-dollar deals, women adorned in designer dresses and jewelry that could fund a small business, and the general atmosphere of wealth and status that these establishments cultivated. What Matt didn't realize was that he was being watched. Thomas Richardson, a waiter who had been working at Le Bernardin West for 3 years, was observing him with obvious disdain. Thomas prided himself on being able to identify the restaurant's appropriate clientele from across the room. In his mind, this establishment was exclusively for society's elite, and anyone who didn't fit that mold was somehow beneath the restaurant's standards. As he looked at Matt's casual attire, his expression twisted with disgust. "Who let this guy in here?" Thomas muttered under his breath to another server. "Look at him. Jeans and sneakers in a place like this? Probably some tech bro trying to impress someone with daddy's credit card." The other server glanced over at Matt, who was being seated at a corner table. "He doesn't look like he belongs here," she agreed. Thomas shook his head with contempt. "People like that have no idea what class means. This isn't some chain restaurant where you can just walk in wearing whatever you want." Matt, completely unaware of the harsh judgment being passed on him, settled into his seat and picked up the menu. He was genuinely excited about the culinary experience ahead. The prices were steep, but after a particularly demanding week, he was looking forward to treating himself to an exceptional meal. The restaurant's atmosphere was everything he had hoped for: sophisticated, peaceful, and refined. He had no idea that his evening was about to take a dramatically different turn. Thomas approached Matt's table with visible reluctance. His usual charming demeanor, the one he reserved for VIP customers, completely absent. His expression was cold and barely concealed his irritation at having to serve someone he clearly considered beneath the restaurant's standards. "Are you ready to order?" Thomas asked, his tone suggesting he hoped the answer would be a quick yes so he could move on to more important customers. "I'd love to start with the wine list, please," Matt replied cordially, maintaining his friendly demeanor despite sensing the waiter's obvious hostility. Thomas let out an audible sigh of annoyance. The wine list. Right. He turned and walked away without another word, clearly in no hurry to accommodate this particular guest. During Thomas's absence, Matt couldn't help but observe the stark difference in service around him. At neighboring tables, waiters were attentive and engaging, refilling water glasses before they were even half empty, offering recommendations with enthusiasm, and treating every customer like royalty. The level of service was exactly what you'd expect from a restaurant of this caliber, except, apparently, at his table. When Thomas finally returned with the wine list several minutes later, he practically dropped it onto the table without ceremony. "The house wine is perfectly adequate for most people," he said dismissively, clearly trying to steer Matt toward the cheapest option available. Matt studied the extensive wine list with genuine interest, taking his time to read through the impressive selection. "Actually, I'd like to try the 2015 Bordeaux, the Chateau Margaux," he said after careful consideration. Thomas's eyebrows shot up in obvious surprise. The bottle cost $850, 0 cents, more than many people's monthly car payment. "Are you sure about that?" he asked, his tone dripping with skepticism. "That's quite an expensive choice. Maybe something more reasonable?" The implication in Thomas's words was crystal clear. He didn't believe Matt could afford such an expensive bottle, or worse, that he shouldn't be spending that kind of money in this establishment. The condescension was so obvious that even nearby diners began to notice the unusual interaction. "I'm quite sure about my choice," Matt replied calmly, though he was beginning to understand exactly what was happening. Thomas reluctantly took the wine order, his disapproval evident in every gesture. When he returned with the bottle, he didn't perform the traditional tasting ritual that other customers were receiving. Instead, he simply opened the bottle and poured a glass, without any of the ceremony or respect typically associated with a wine of that caliber. "Will you be ordering food, or?" Thomas asked impatiently, as if he wanted to rush Matt through his meal and get him out of the restaurant as quickly as possible. Matt ordered the chef's tasting menu, the restaurant's most expensive offering, at $350, 0 cents per person. Thomas's reaction was barely concealed shock, followed by what appeared to be suspicion, as if he couldn't believe this ordinary customer could afford such an extravagant meal. As the evening progressed, the discrimination became increasingly obvious and painful to watch. Thomas would disappear for extended periods, leaving Matt's water glass empty while meticulously attending to every need of the surrounding tables. When the first course finally arrived, it was noticeably lukewarm, suggesting it had been sitting under heat lamps while Thomas prioritized his more deserving customers. The presentation was sloppy compared to the artistic plating visible at other tables. The portion was smaller, and there was no explanation of the dish or its ingredients, courtesies that Thomas provided to every other guest in his section. At one point, when Matt politely asked about the preparation of a particular dish, a perfectly reasonable question for any customer paying $350, 0 cents for a tasting menu, Thomas actually rolled his eyes in exasperation before providing a curt, dismissive response. The breaking point came when Thomas decided to make his disdain public. Approaching Matt's table with barely contained hostility, he spoke loudly enough for surrounding tables to hear clearly. "Sir, I'm going to need to ask you to keep your voice down," Thomas announced, his tone dripping with authority and condescension. "This is a sophisticated establishment, and we expect our guests to maintain appropriate decorum befitting a restaurant of this caliber." The request was not only unreasonable, but deliberately humiliating. Matt had been speaking in perfectly normal conversational tones, no louder than anyone else in the dining room. Several nearby diners turned to stare, and Matt felt the weight of their curious and judgmental gazes. The couple at the table next to him exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly recognizing that something inappropriate was happening. An elderly businessman dining alone looked up from his meal with obvious disapproval at the waiter's behavior. "I understand," Matt replied quietly, his voice steady despite the public embarrassment he was experiencing. Thomas seemed to take satisfaction in the moment, standing over Matt's table with an air of superiority. "We pride ourselves on maintaining a certain atmosphere here," he continued, ensuring his voice carried to nearby tables. "I'm sure you can appreciate that." The implication was clear to everyone within earshot. Thomas was suggesting that Matt didn't belong in this sophisticated environment, that his very presence was somehow disrupting the restaurant's refined atmosphere. Matt simply nodded, refusing to escalate the situation, despite being treated with blatant disrespect. His gracious response only seemed to embolden Thomas, who returned to his other tables with renewed attention and charm, the contrast in his behavior becoming impossible to ignore. Other diners were beginning to whisper among themselves, some expressing discomfort at what they were witnessing, while others seemed to be enjoying the spectacle of someone being put in their place. Just as Thomas was delivering Matt's main course, again lukewarm and carelessly presented compared to the artistic presentations at neighboring tables, a commotion began near the restaurant's bar area. A group of young film students who had been enjoying drinks after class suddenly went quiet, then began whispering excitedly among themselves. One of them, a young woman named Jessica, kept glancing toward Matt's table with growing recognition. "Oh my God," she whispered to her friends. "I think that's Matt Damon over there." Her friends followed her gaze, squinting through the restaurant's dim lighting. "Are you sure?" one asked. "He doesn't look like what you'd expect." "It's definitely him," Jessica insisted, her voice growing more confident. "I've seen every single one of his movies. That's absolutely Matt Damon." The excitement at their table was becoming noticeable, and their whispered conversation was starting to draw attention from nearby diners. Other customers began discreetly glancing toward Matt's table, trying to confirm what they were hearing. Jessica stood up, her hands trembling with nervous excitement. "I have to ask for a photo," she told her friends. "This might be my only chance to meet my favorite actor." As she approached Matt's table, Thomas was walking away after delivering the disappointing main course. The timing couldn't have been more perfect, or more devastating for the arrogant waiter. "Excuse me," Jessica said softly, approaching Matt's table with obvious reverence. "I'm so sorry to bother you during your dinner, but are you Matt Damon?" Matt looked up with the first genuine smile he'd had all evening. "I am," he replied warmly. "What's your name?" "Jessica," she stammered, still unable to believe she was actually talking to her hero. "I'm a film student at USC, and you're honestly my biggest inspiration. Good Will Hunting completely changed my perspective on storytelling." The words Matt Damon rang out clearly across the restaurant's dining room like a bell, cutting through the sophisticated ambiance. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, forks paused halfway to mouths, and heads turned in unison toward the corner table. Thomas, who had been approaching another table with his usual charming demeanor, froze completely. The color drained from his face, as the reality of the situation crashed down on him like a tsunami. "I'd be happy to take a photo with you," Matt told Jessica warmly, rising from his seat with genuine kindness. "Tell me about your studies. What kind of films are you interested in making?" As Jessica fumbled with her phone camera, practically glowing with excitement, whispers began spreading throughout the restaurant like wildfire. "It's Matt Damon. The Academy Award winner Matt Damon is here. How did nobody recognize him?" Other diners began pulling out their phones, some taking discreet photos, others texting friends about their celebrity sighting. The atmosphere in the restaurant shifted completely as people realized they were in the presence of one of Hollywood's most respected actors. Thomas stood paralyzed near the kitchen entrance, watching in horror as his catastrophic mistake became clear to everyone in the restaurant. His colleagues began staring at him with expressions ranging from shock to disappointment to outright anger. More customers approached Matt's table, each interaction revealing his genuine warmth and humility. He signed napkins, took selfies, and engaged in meaningful conversations about his films and career. The contrast with how Thomas had been treating him was becoming painfully obvious to everyone present. The restaurant manager, Antonio Rodriguez, emerged from his office after being alerted by his staff. When he saw the scene unfolding, one of Hollywood's biggest stars surrounded by admiring fans while being treated like royalty by everyone except his own waiter, his face went pale with professional horror. Manager Rodriguez quickly approached Thomas, who was still standing frozen, watching the disaster unfold. "What exactly has been happening here tonight?" Rodriguez demanded in an urgent whisper. I didn't know who he was," Thomas stammered weakly. "Didn't know what?" Rodriguez's voice was sharp with barely controlled anger, that you should treat every single customer with respect and professionalism regardless of who they are or what they're wearing. Rodriguez had built his entire career on ensuring exceptional service for every guest. The realization that one of his waiters had been discriminating against customers based on their appearance was not just embarrassing, it was potentially catastrophic for the restaurant's reputation. As he watched the situation develop, Rodriguez began to notice all the evidence of Thomas's poor service. Matt's table setting was noticeably inferior to others: smaller portions, sloppy presentation, no garnishes or artistic touches. The wine service had been perfunctory at best, and most damning of all, Matt's water glass had been empty for over 20 minutes, while Thomas meticulously attended to every other table in his section. "Go to my office immediately," Rodriguez told Thomas through gritted teeth. "We will discuss your future employment after I handle this situation." Rodriguez approached Matt's table with genuine remorse and professional concern. "Mr. Damon," he said respectfully, "I am Antonio Rodriguez, the general manager of Le Bernardin West. I want to personally apologize for any issues with your service this evening. This behavior is absolutely not representative of our standards or values." Matt looked up from signing another autograph, his expression gracious despite everything that had happened. "Thank you, Antonio. I appreciate that." But Rodriguez could see in Matt's eyes that significant damage had been done. This wasn't just about poor service, it was about being treated with disrespect and discrimination in front of a dining room full of people, many of whom were now recording the aftermath on their phones. What happened next would become legendary in Hollywood circles and beyond. Despite having every right to be furious, despite having been publicly humiliated based solely on his appearance, Matt Damon chose a path that would teach everyone present an unforgettable lesson about character and dignity. The atmosphere in the restaurant had shifted completely. What moments before had been a typical evening of fine dining had transformed into something resembling a masterclass in human behavior. Every eye in the establishment was focused on Matt's table. Every conversation had ceased, and even the ambient background music seemed to fade into insignificance. When Rodriguez offered to comp his entire meal and provide any compensation he deemed appropriate, Matt politely declined with a grace that left the manager speechless. "That's very generous, Antonio, but it's not necessary. What would be truly valuable is if this situation could become a learning opportunity for everyone." Rodriguez felt a mixture of relief and admiration. In his 15 years of restaurant management, he had dealt with countless difficult situations, angry customers, and service failures. But never had he encountered someone who responded to poor treatment with such remarkable composure and wisdom. The restaurant had become completely silent, with every customer and staff member hanging on Matt's every word. Even the kitchen staff had stopped their work to listen to what was unfolding. Dishes sat half-prepared on cutting boards as chefs leaned toward the kitchen's pass-through window to hear better. Matt rose from his seat slowly, his movement deliberate and dignified. The simple act of standing seemed to command even more attention, if that were possible. His presence filled the room in a way that had nothing to do with celebrity status and everything to do with the moral authority he had earned through his response to mistreatment. "What happened tonight," Matt continued, his voice calm but carrying clearly throughout the dining room, "shouldn't happen to anyone, not because of who I am, but because every person deserves basic respect and dignity when they walk through your doors." He gestured toward the other diners with genuine warmth, his eyes making contact with several of them as he spoke. "The family celebrating their anniversary over there, the young couple on what appears to be their first date, the businessman dining alone at the bar, they all deserve the same level of service and respect that any customer should receive, regardless of how they're dressed or what assumptions someone might make about them." The family he referenced, an elderly couple celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary, looked up from their dessert with tears in their eyes. The woman reached across the table to squeeze her husband's hand, both of them deeply moved by the unexpected lesson they were witnessing. The young couple on their first date, who had been nervously making conversation all evening, suddenly found themselves part of something much larger than their personal milestone. The young man later told friends that Matt Damon's words about respect and dignity became a foundation principle in their relationship. Thomas, who had been watching from the kitchen doorway against Rodriguez's explicit orders, felt tears welling up in his eyes. The weight of his behavior and its implications was crushing him with shame and regret. Every word Matt spoke felt like a mirror being held up to his soul, reflecting back an image he didn't like, but knew was accurate. "You see," Matt continued, his voice taking on a more personal tone, "I've been incredibly fortunate in my career and my life. I've had opportunities that most people never get, and I've been blessed with success beyond anything I could have imagined when I started acting." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "But that doesn't make me more deserving of good treatment than anyone else. Success, fame, wealth, none of these things should determine how we treat each other as human beings." An elderly businessman dining alone at the bar, who had been watching the entire evening unfold with growing discomfort, set down his scotch and found himself nodding in agreement. He thought about his own behavior over the years, how he had sometimes treated service workers based on assumptions about their education or background. "Your waiter made assumptions about me based on my appearance," Matt went on, his tone remaining gentle but firm. "And unfortunately, that's something many people face every day in restaurants, stores, and workplaces everywhere. The difference is, I have the privilege of knowing that this treatment was an exception for me." He looked directly at Thomas now, his gaze compassionate rather than accusatory. For many people, this kind of discrimination is a daily reality they face everywhere they go. The single mother working 2 jobs who gets looked down upon because she can't afford designer clothes. The elderly person who gets dismissed because someone assumes they don't understand technology. The young person who gets judged because of their appearance or the way they speak. Thomas felt his knees weaken as Matt's words hit home. He thought about his own background, how he had grown up in a working-class family, how his parents had struggled to pay for his education, how he had worked his way up from bussing tables to waiting tables at this prestigious restaurant. Somewhere along the way, he had forgotten where he came from and had started judging others the way he had once been judged. "What makes tonight particularly meaningful," Matt continued, "is not that I was eventually recognized. It's that we have an opportunity to examine our own biases and assumptions. We all have them, they're part of being human, but we have a choice about whether we act on them in ways that hurt other people." A woman at a nearby table, who had been filming parts of the interaction on her phone, quietly put the device away. She realized that this wasn't a moment to be captured for social media. It was a moment to be experienced and learned from. The lesson was profound and universal, resonating with everyone present who had either experienced or witnessed similar discrimination. Matt's words were creating ripple effects throughout the room as people reflected on their own behavior and experiences. "I want to share something with all of you," Matt said, his voice becoming more intimate despite addressing the entire restaurant. "Some of my most meaningful interactions as an actor haven't been on movie sets or at award ceremonies. They've been in places like this, restaurants, coffee shops, grocery stores, where I've been able to connect with people as simply another human being." He smiled, genuinely for the first time all evening. "Those interactions remind me that beneath all the external trappings, the clothes we wear, the cars we drive, the jobs we have, we're all just people trying to make our way in the world with dignity and respect." Rodriguez found himself deeply moved by Matt's words. As a manager, he had always focused on providing excellent service to ensure good reviews and repeat business. But he was beginning to understand that true hospitality was about something much deeper than just efficient service. "Tonight could have gone very differently," Matt acknowledged. "I could have been angry. I could have demanded to speak to a manager immediately. I could have made a scene or threatened bad publicity. And honestly, there was a part of me that was tempted to do exactly that." Several diners nodded, understanding that reaction completely. The fact that he had chosen differently made his response even more powerful. But what would that have accomplished? It might have made me feel better in the moment, but it wouldn't have created any real change or learning, and it certainly wouldn't have honored the values I try to live by. Thomas stepped forward slightly from his position by the kitchen, drawing Matt's attention. The actor looked at him with kindness rather than anger, which somehow made Thomas feel even worse about his behavior. The truth is, Matt continued, we're all works in progress. We all make mistakes, and we all have opportunities to grow and do better. What matters is not that we're perfect, but that we're willing to learn and change when we recognize we've done wrong. Matt stood up from his table, having finished his meal despite the consistently poor service throughout the evening. He had paid his full bill without complaint, including a standard tip, refusing any special treatment or discounts that Rodriguez had desperately tried to offer. This gesture alone spoke volumes about his character. Even after being mistreated, he didn't use his power or status to avoid paying or to punish the restaurant financially. The simple act of paying normally, of treating the establishment with respect despite not receiving it in return, was not lost on the other diners. Several of them would later tell friends and family that this detail, the quiet dignity of paying his bill in full, was what impressed them most about the entire evening. "Antonio," Matt said to the manager, his voice carrying a warmth that made Rodriguez feel both grateful and ashamed of what had transpired. "I'd like to address your staff, if that would be appropriate." Rodriguez immediately agreed, recognizing that this was an extraordinary opportunity for his team to learn from one of the most respected figures in entertainment. But more than that, he understood that this was a chance for his staff to hear from someone who had handled a difficult situation with remarkable grace and wisdom. "Of course, Mr. Damon. It would be an honor," Rodriguez replied, his voice thick with emotion. Rodriguez quickly gathered his entire front-of-house staff in the dining room, and word spread so quickly that even kitchen staff emerged to listen. The sommelier abandoned his wine inventory. The pastry chef left her dessert preparations, and even the dishwashers came out from the back to hear what Matt had to say. The sight was unusual and powerful. A restaurant's entire staff gathered in the dining room while customers remained seated, everyone understanding that they were about to witness something significant. "I want everyone to understand," Matt began, addressing the assembled team with the same warmth he had shown his fans earlier, "that what happened tonight wasn't really about me being recognized or not recognized. It was about basic human decency and the assumptions we make about people." He looked around the group, making eye contact with as many staff members as possible. Each person he looked at felt as though he was speaking directly to them, making his message personal and immediate. "When I walked into this restaurant tonight, I was just a customer looking forward to a good meal. I wasn't trying to hide who I was, but I also wasn't announcing it. I was simply being myself. Someone who prefers comfortable clothes and values substance over appearance." A young server near the front of the group shifted uncomfortably, remembering times when she had made similar judgments about customers based on their appearance. "The treatment I received from one member of your team was based entirely on assumptions about my worth as a customer and as a person. Those assumptions were wrong, but even if they had been correct, they wouldn't have justified the discriminatory treatment." Matt's voice remained gentle but firm, ensuring every word carried weight. "You see, the problem wasn't that Thomas didn't recognize me as an actor. The problem was that he didn't recognize me as a human being, deserving of respect." He looked directly at Thomas, who was standing at the back of the group, visibly shaken and remorseful. "We all make judgments about people based on how they look, how they dress, how they speak, or what we think we know about them. It's a natural human tendency, but when we act on those judgments in ways that hurt others, we cross a line that we shouldn't cross." Thomas felt every word like a physical blow, not because Matt was being harsh, but because he was being so understanding. The kindness in Matt's voice made Thomas's behavior seem even worse by comparison. "Tonight, I experienced what many individuals face regularly, being judged and treated poorly based on superficial characteristics. The difference is, I have the privilege of knowing that this treatment was an exception for me. For many people, this kind of discrimination is a daily reality they face everywhere they go." An older server, Maria, who had been working in restaurants for over 20 years, found herself thinking about the countless times she had witnessed or even participated in similar judgments. She thought about the construction workers who were sometimes treated dismissively when they came in for lunch, still wearing their work clothes. She thought about the elderly customers who were rushed through their meals because staff assumed they wouldn't tip well. The staff listened in rapt attention, many nodding in understanding and agreement. Some were fighting back tears as they recognized their own biases in Matt's words. I've learned something important in my career, Matt continued, and it applies just as much to the service industry as it does to entertainment. Every person has a story. Every person has struggles, dreams, fears, and hopes. When we reduce someone to just their appearance or our assumptions about their circumstances, we rob them of their humanity. He gestured toward the dining room. The man sitting alone at table 7 might be celebrating a promotion he's worked 10 years to achieve. The woman at table 12 might be treating herself to an expensive meal for the first time since her divorce. The young couple by the window might have saved for months to afford this dinner as part of their engagement celebration. These specific examples hit home with the staff because they could see the customers Matt was referring to. Suddenly, each table became not just a source of tips and work, but a collection of real people with real stories. But here's the thing, Matt said, his voice becoming more passionate. It doesn't matter what their stories are. Whether someone is celebrating or struggling, whether they're wealthy or saving every penny, whether they're famous or completely unknown, every person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. The restaurant manager, Rodriguez, felt a fundamental shift in his understanding of hospitality. He had always focused on providing good service to ensure positive reviews and repeat business. But Matt was describing something deeper, a philosophy of service based on recognizing the humanity in every customer. So my challenge to all of you is this, Matt continued. Treat every person who walks through those doors with the same respect, attention, and care you would give to your most valued customer. Because you never know someone's story. You never know what they've been through to afford a meal here. And most importantly, every human being deserves dignity, regardless of their appearance or perceived status. A young busboy raised his hand tentatively. Mr. Damon, how do we change? How do we stop making those assumptions? Matt smiled at the question, appreciating its honesty. That's a great question. I think the first step is recognizing that we all have biases. I have them too. The difference is being aware of them and making a conscious choice not to act on them in ways that hurt others. He paused, thinking carefully about his response. Try this. Before you approach any customer, take a moment to remind yourself that you don't know their story. Assume the best about people rather than the worst. Give everyone the benefit of the doubt. Another server spoke up. But what if we're wrong? What if someone really can't afford to be here? Then you still treat them with respect, Matt replied immediately. If someone is in your restaurant, they have the right to be there. Maybe they're stretching their budget for a special occasion. Maybe someone else is paying. Maybe they've worked extra hours to afford this experience. It's not your job to police who belongs here based on how they look. The questions and discussion continued for several more minutes, with Matt patiently addressing each concern and sharing insights from his own experiences with being judged and misjudged. Finally, Thomas stepped forward from the back of the group, his voice shaking with emotion. Mr. Damon, I owe you a deeply personal apology. My behavior tonight was inexcusable and wrong. I made assumptions about you that were completely unfair, and even if those assumptions had been accurate, they wouldn't have justified how I treated you. He paused, struggling with the magnitude of his mistake and the weight of Matt's gracious response. You've shown me something about myself that I'm ashamed of, and I promise you and everyone here that I will learn from this and do better. Thomas's voice broke slightly as he continued. I grew up in a family that struggled financially. My parents worked multiple jobs to support us, and I saw how they were sometimes treated by people who thought they were better than us. Somehow, I became the thing I used to resent. I became someone who judges people based on their appearance and makes assumptions about their worth. The confession was raw and honest, and it resonated with several other staff members who recognized similar contradictions in their own behavior. Matt stepped forward and extended his hand to Thomas, who took it with visible relief and gratitude. Thomas, thank you for that apology. It takes courage to admit when we've been wrong, and it takes even more courage to commit to change. Matt's handshake was firm and warm, conveying forgiveness without minimizing the seriousness of what had happened. We all have opportunities to grow and learn from our mistakes. What matters most is what we choose to do moving forward. The gesture was simple but powerful. In that handshake, Matt demonstrated the kind of grace and forgiveness that transforms situations and people. As Matt prepared to leave, he did something that no one expected. He quietly approached Rodriguez and discreetly handed him his credit card again. "I'd like to cover the check for every table currently dining tonight," he said softly, ensuring his gesture wouldn't become a spectacle or overshadow the lesson that had just been shared. Rodriguez was stunned into silence for a moment. After everything that had happened, after being mistreated by his staff, Matt was choosing to perform an act of extraordinary generosity. "Mr. Damon, that's incredibly generous, but after what happened, I want to do this," Matt insisted, his voice gentle but firm. "Not as an apology for what happened, that's not needed, but as a celebration of the lesson we all learned tonight. Sometimes the best way to respond to negativity is with unexpected kindness and generosity." The gesture was quintessentially Matt Damon, understated, thoughtful, and focused on others rather than himself. It was the perfect conclusion to an evening that had started with discrimination and ended with a masterclass in human decency. Rodriguez calculated the bill quickly in his head. With nearly every table occupied and many customers ordering expensive wine and multi-course meals, the total would exceed $12,000. 0 cents. Matt paid it without hesitation, asking only that Rodriguez wait until after his departure to inform the other diners. "Let them know after I'm gone," Matt said with a smile. "This isn't about recognition, it's about celebrating the fact that we all learned something tonight about treating each other better." As Matt walked toward the exit, several things happened simultaneously. The staff, who had been standing in the dining room listening to his impromptu speech, began applauding softly. The applause was picked up by the customers, who had been watching the entire interaction with rapt attention. Within moments, spontaneous applause erupted throughout the dining room. Customers who had witnessed the entire evening, the discrimination, the grace under pressure, the powerful lesson, and finally the incredible act of generosity, rose to their feet to honor not just a celebrity, but a man who had demonstrated extraordinary character and class. The standing ovation lasted for several minutes, with many people wiping away tears. It wasn't applause for a performance or an achievement. It was recognition of something much more valuable: authentic human goodness in action. Matt paused at the door and turned back to wave goodbye, his expression humble and slightly embarrassed by the attention. Even in this moment of recognition, he remained focused on others rather than himself. As the door closed behind him, the restaurant remained in stunned silence for several moments. Then, slowly, conversations resumed, but they were different now. People weren't just talking about their meals or their day, they were talking about what they had witnessed and what it meant. Rodriguez approached the microphone at the host station and made an announcement that would be remembered by everyone present. "Ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to let you know that your meals this evening have been graciously covered by the gentleman who just left. He asked me to tell you that this gesture is his way of celebrating the lesson we all learned tonight about treating each other with dignity and respect." The reaction was immediate and emotional. Several people began crying openly, moved not just by the generosity, but by the complete unexpectedness of it. Others pulled out their phones to call family members and share the incredible experience they had just witnessed. Thomas approached Rodriguez after the customers had settled back into their meals. "Sir, I understand if you need to terminate my employment. What I did tonight was unacceptable, and I take full responsibility." Rodriguez looked at the young man for a long moment, considering his options. "Thomas, what you did was wrong, and it can never happen again. Ever. But Mr. Damon just showed us all something powerful about second chances and the possibility of growth and redemption." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "If you're truly committed to learning from this experience and becoming a better person and a better server, then we'll work through this together. But understand, this is your one and only opportunity to prove that you've learned from tonight." Thomas nodded vigorously, tears of relief and gratitude streaming down his face. "I won't let you down, sir. I won't let anyone down. Tonight changed me, and I'll spend every day proving that." As the evening wound down and the last customers departed, the staff gathered to clean up and reflect on what had happened. The story would be told and retold, becoming part of the restaurant's culture and a touchstone for how to treat every customer who walked through their doors. Thank you for experiencing this incredible true story about respect, dignity, and the transformative power of responding to negativity with grace and wisdom. Matt Damon's handling of this situation reminds us all that true character isn't revealed in our moments of triumph, but in how we respond to challenges, mistreatment, and the opportunity to lift others up rather than tear them down. This story teaches us that everyone deserves respect, regardless of their appearance, status, or our assumptions about them. It shows us that how we treat others, especially when we think no one important is watching, reveals who we really are as human beings. If this story inspired you to examine your own biases and commit to treating everyone with greater dignity and respect, please like this video and subscribe for more amazing real-life stories that restore faith in humanity. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever witnessed or experienced similar treatment? How do you think you would have handled this situation? Remember, you never know who you're serving, but more importantly, everyone deserves to be served with dignity, kindness, and respect. Let's all strive to be a little more like Matt Damon in how we treat our fellow human beings.